Nora, welcome to the show. It's so lovely to have you. Welcome.
Thank you, Mireya. I'm very excited to be here.
I'm super excited, not only because you accepted the invitation to be here, but also because I get to know Nora a little bit more along with the audience. And I happen to think that we're going to have or get the opportunity to talk about a lot of different great things. And so I'm excited for the conversation. So again, thank you. So if you would be so kind as to sharing with us where you grew up and what a fond childhood memory of yours is.
Well, I grew up in a small town called Delicias, Chihuahua. That's in northern Mexico. We are about 4 hours away from the US-Mexico border. I don't live there now. I live in the capital of the state. But I wasn't born there, but that's where I grew up. My parents are both teachers. And when I was probably in first grade, no, actually in kindergarten, they both got jobs in Delicias. And so we moved down there. Um, I think, as with everyone who has grown up in a small town, the memories are those of just being carefree and being able to play with your neighbors and your siblings and all that. And so it was a good childhood. Um, the most exciting thing I ever did, and my mother always reminds me of this, is we had a big fig tree in the backyard in our patio. And so a neighbor and I would just go to the fig tree when there were a lot of figs and then, get all the figs and go around and sell them to the neighbors. That was like our business. And they would buy them from us. Can you believe that? We became millionaires selling
Yeah.
figs to the neighbors. I don't remember exactly when it began, but I do remember being enrolled in like an afternoon English class when I was in probably third grade or so. But it didn't go anywhere. It's like I think it was a summer class or something, and so that's the thing that is probably difficult for people to understand today. Back then, when any of you, especially if you lived in a small town, it wasn't like you were exposed to a lot of culture or a lot of languages or anything. I didn't really know anyone that I can remember who spoke foreign languages, a foreign language or more. And so, but I do remember taking that class, and I think that's probably where it started, where I said, I want to do that. And I didn't really, of course, learn that much. It was just for the summer and it wasn't like intensive or anything. But I remember playing with my friends. We used to play two games. One of the games was we used to play speaking English, by speaking gibberish. Of course, we just made it sound like English, but of course, we didn't know anything. And the second thing we played was we played school. And one of the classes in our play school was English. So of course that was fun to do, but again, that didn't go anywhere. When I was in high school, one of my English teachers mentioned that she had worked on a project. This was like an isolated project, so it was a big deal, subtitling some movies. And I thought that was the coolest thing in the world. And so that was the first time probably that I thought, I would like to do something like that. And then our school principal, during those meetings when they tell you about possible professions and career paths and things like that, he had been an English teacher, but he mentioned that he had been a translator at some point, and he talked about being an interpreter. And that's when I really thought, that's something that I really want to do. And I just had one big problem. I didn't know English. So this is when I was already in high school. And so I thought, well, there's two options. I either give up on this and go to law school, which was my other plan, my plan B, or I learn English as quickly as I can so that I can get into school. So I there was in a city 1 hour away from where I lived, which is where I live now. the state university had a degree that was in an English degree, which was to become a teacher and translator, interpreter. And so I checked the requirements, and of course, the number one requirement was you had to be bilingual, because the admission exam was an English test. I mean, you didn't have to, you just had to prove that you could understand classes in English and everything, because the entire degree was taught in English. So this was 2 semesters before I was due to graduate from high school. So I thought, I have 1 year. And so I started, I told my parents, and my father said, well, you can start taking some private lessons. And if you don't pass the test, then we'll look into sending you abroad so you can learn English if you turn out to be a failure and can learn it. Classes with you. So I started taking some lessons, just in a language school, and so the time came for me to take my test, and I passed. I think it was a miracle, because looking back, my English was no, it wasn't where it needed to be. But whoever the teacher who interviewed me, the professor who interviewed me probably took pity on me and said, yeah, okay. And so at the beginning, I'm not going to lie, it was super difficult, because we were having these, I mean, you go from taking lessons in a language school where you're learning things like nice to meet you, and just some basic stuff.
Right.
And then you go into college level classes where you are taking advanced grammar, linguistics, history, American US history, and then literature and stylistics and all of these things in English. The whole thing was in English. And not only do you have to sit there and it's not like you can just sit there and look like you know what you're doing. You have to write essays and give presentations and stuff. And so I thought, well, I'd better work hard at this. And so it was hard the first semester, maybe the first couple of semesters. But by the end of the first semester, one of my teachers was was in charge of something that was called, it was like a language school run by the US Embassy. And he was in charge of this school, and he invited me to teach there. That was like a dream for me, because remember that 5 months earlier, I couldn't put 2 sentences together. So he decided that I would probably be okay to work at his school, at this very prestigious school. And I started working there. And so, yeah, that was my, how I got interested and how I got started with languages. Several of my courses at school were linguistics, all kinds of linguistics classes. But the ones where I realized very quickly could help me with my accent were phonetics and phonology. So I thought, when I realized that that could happen, I made a very conscious decision to really learn about phonetics and phonology and to put it into practice. So not only to learn it in terms of the theory, but to actually put it into practice. And so what that means is when you learn phonetics, you learn how sounds are created. I mean, I remember books that we read, like How Languages Are Learned, and where I would pay a lot of attention to the little things that give away your native language when you're speaking a foreign language. Like, for example, for me as a Spanish speaker, little things like, for example, if a word begins with an S followed by a consonant, like Spanish, something that gives us away a lot of times is adding the E sound at the beginning is Spanish, right? Mm-hmm. And so I would read that and I would say, okay, so from now on, I'm going to pay attention to whenever I have to say school, Spanish, street. And so that sounds different from saying a school, is Spanish, is street, right? And so so I was very, very careful about that. Later on, after I finished, this is another thing that is, I think everybody will agree that this is a great way of learning, teaching. So, right? So At some point after I graduated, very soon after I graduated, I was invited to teach at the university, at the program where I graduated from. And I used to teach phonetics and phonology. And so you have to study it more, and then you have to be, telling the students how sounds are produced and everything. And then it's just a matter of internalizing it yourself and listening to yourself, and that monitor that constantly monitors what you're saying. Just when you catch yourself saying something that is not said correctly, then you try to work on that. So it was very intentional. It wasn't by imitation, let me tell you, because there is this misconception that you can learn, you can get rid of your accent or you can improve your accent. And I understand that a lot of people don't want to get rid of their accent, and I'm perfectly okay with that.
Right.
But because, cultural identity and all that. But there is this misconception that, for example, as a language learner, if you have a native speaker as a teacher, then your accent will be better. That is not true. And the opposite is not true either. You can be a teacher. And again, this is all my training as a teacher, right? Because I also used to be a teacher trainer for many years. You can be a non-native teacher who doesn't have a perfect accent, but if you know how to teach, then your students can really work on their accent. It's like a sports coach, right? Who doesn't necessarily have to be the best player of the sport, but if they know how to coach, then they can develop great players. And so that's my advice for anyone wanting to work on their accent. Approach it very, I would say, very scientifically. Don't just try to learn it by ear. Learn the rules, understand the rules, and apply the rules, because there are rules. What I did, and you're probably going to laugh at this, but then going back to what we were saying earlier about seizing every opportunity. The School of Dentistry of the university where I went to school, when I was in my very last semester, they came to my school and they said, we are putting together a dentistry conference. We need 3 interpreters. Guess who raised their hand? Of course, I said, I'll do it. I had no idea, Mireya, what I was getting into. I had never seen a booth. The program that I was in was very basic. They would tell you some theory, but it wasn't like, these great programs where you have full-on training and booths and everything. And so I don't think the teacher that we had was even an actual interpreter, looking back many years later. But so many people, going back to what you said earlier, are so afraid to step up and to take opportunities that there wasn't a lot of competition. And so the School of Dentistry was stuck with me. Yeah. And a couple of other people, another student and one of our professors. And so because of the same this same situation, or the way I came to the university, where I never felt like I knew enough, even though I tried to study everything, and I took everything very seriously. I still do. And so I took the responsibility very seriously. And so without anyone necessarily telling me, just out of common sense, I got the phone numbers. This was pre-internet. So I got the phone numbers of the organizers of the conference, who were, dentists from our town. And so I called them up and I said, Doctor, would it be possible for me to come and speak to you, because I'm going to be one of the interpreters? Everybody said yes. So I came to their offices, and then I would act like I knew what I was doing, even though I had no idea. So I thought, I need information, right? And then there was no Google. There weren't even personal computers available to everyone back then. So I said, do you have any books or any magazines, any journals that I could borrow? And they were happy to provide me with a lot of information. So I would leave each of the offices. I went to each of the specialists because this was a big conference. And so, with a stack of books and things, and they all said, very importantly, call me if you have any questions. Of course, I had questions. So I went home and, I started making my glossaries, and I had all the English terms, but I didn't have any of the Spanish terms. So, and I didn't have a specialized, dictionary that I could look them up into. So I would call them, doctor, how do you say this? And to this day, I still remember a lot of the vocabulary. And so, oh, this is how you say it, or, and so they helped me build the glossaries. And so, yeah, so out of not knowing and out of that fear of not doing it right, I just sat down and I thought, okay, common sense. What do I need to do? I need to learn this. And then I need to be able to interpret simultaneously. So again, no YouTube, no internet, nothing. I mean, nothing to practice with. So what I did was I would record, the books that they gave me. I would record myself on a cassette. This is for young people listening to this. They have no idea what I'm talking about. On a cassette. You probably have no idea what I'm talking about.
I totally do.
So I thought, well, okay, I'm going to do this. And so I would open the book and I would record myself reading off the book, right? And then I would rewind the recording and then interpret over that by myself. I mean, I didn't get to practice with anyone. And so yeah, that's how I got started at dentistry conference. And let me tell you that the part that the happy ending, the story is that I get to the conference, and of course I knew the organizers because I had been to all of their offices. And who I didn't know the men who had set up the booth and the receivers, and I had never seen the inside of a booth. I got there and he explained to me how to how to use the console, and I thought, well, okay, this can't be too hard. I'm sitting in the back of the room and it starts and I go first, right? And as soon as I start, I was relatively young. Maybe I was about 21 or 22, and probably the doctors, because I had so many questions, they weren't sure that I was going to do a good job. And so what happened is it starts and I start and it, things flow. Why? Because I had studied so much that I knew what they were talking about. I mean, I had read so many articles about, oral surgery and this and that and the other, that I understood what they were talking about. And so that helps things flow, right? And the president of the group of doctors who were organizing the conference was sitting in the first row. He got up and he turned and he was like at me, giving me a thumbs up. So that was really a very nice experience. After that, the men who had the all the booths and the equipment and everything, I met him there, and he started giving me jobs after that. And to this day, Mireya, I take my work very seriously. I mean, I've been doing this for many years now, but I will never step, into a booth without having prepared. Even if it's something that I'm familiar with, I will read and I will study and I will go over things. And I think it's important to take it seriously. In my case, remember when I first started, after my very first event, I started getting more work, not in the area of dentistry, but just in general, from the men who installed the booths and who had so from the audiovisual company. So that's one first point of contact. And I think it's important for us not to underestimate that. And what I want to say here, Mireya, because I've seen it happen many times, and I hate when that happens, is we have to be nice to the technicians. We have, it's not nice to feel like you are so superior and above the technicians that you don't even say good morning to them when you get to the venue. You have to be nice to them, because you know what happens? Those technicians after they're done here, they will go to another event and another one. And eventually someone will ask them, do you know an interpreter who can do this? And who do you think they're going to recommend? I had been doing interpretation for a client that worked, it was a group of lawyers that worked on a lot of human rights things, something that I enjoyed tremendously. And the area where I live, unfortunately, has a very high femicide rate. And so they worked a lot with civil society organizations. And I had all the work that I had ever done for them was, where they would bring in someone and they would present a project, or someone would come from the US to give them some training about, how to get grants and things like that. And so one day they called me and they said, Nora, we need you. It was a last minute thing. And we need you guys to be here in Mexico. We call it the C4, which is where the police force is concentrated, and so they have, it's like police headquarters. And so so she said, it's something that came up last minute, and can you be at the C4 at 6 p.m.? And so we said, sure. I mean, they called us in the morning. So I said, sure, we can be there. We get there. And then I'm thinking, we asked how many people, so that we know how many receivers to bring and whether they need a booth and all that. And they said, well, maybe about 20 people. So we get there, and my husband, I told you that he handles all the equipment. And so as we're waiting, he says, well, I need to go and set up and see where this is going to be. And so he leaves, and we're sitting in a room waiting for him, and no one comes and tells us anything. The person, my contact person, wasn't coming back or coming to talk to us or anything. And then my husband comes back and he says, we're not here for a meeting. There's going to be an autopsy, and you need to interpret the autopsy. But it's not going to start right away because they're waiting for a pathologist from New Mexico, who's going to be doing the autopsy along with the two local doctors. And I immediately knew what was going on because that morning I had seen on the news that a very high profile femicide who was in prison for killing a lot of young women in the US-Mexico border area had died that morning. And so it was that moment where you realize, oh, they didn't tell me, they weren't completely honest. But later on, I found out that the girl who called me didn't know either, right? I mean, everything was very secretive because it was a very high profile case. And the reason they were going to do a full autopsy and they needed interpretation was because they wanted to make sure that he hadn't been killed in prison, because he was so there were human rights organizations, observers during the autopsy, which lasted forever, Mireya, because it was a full autopsy. And we were standing right at the table.
I was just going to ask, what was positioning for that? Oh, wow.
Yeah, no, everybody was up in the gallery behind glass, sitting very safely. The three people doing the autopsy and the interpreters were standing around the body, of course.
Nora, how do you prepare for that? How do you prepare mentally?
Yeah, it's like, no, we didn't have a chance to, because we were, it was unexpected. Well, I should say that at least they were kind enough to show me the body before the autopsy began.
Okay.
And I say that jokingly.
Before?
Yeah. You know how sometimes they will show you where you're going to be interpreting or something before you start? Well, while we were waiting for the American pathologist to get there, the director of the center, the facility that we were at, said, well, we should probably go and look at the room where this is going to be taking place. And the body was already there. It was an interesting experience, but what it taught me is that we need to be very clear about communication with the client. It was, I'm not squeamish. So it was, I mean, the worst part was the smell, to tell you the truth.
Oh my gosh. I mean,
plus, it's always been my philosophy that as a service provider, I'm there to help, not to create problems. So it was very late. It wasn't like if I said, no, I'm walking away from this, they were going to be able to find someone else. And it was interesting. but yeah, I did talk to the client afterwards, and I said, oh, you should have warned me, at the very least, because I was wearing high heels and I was standing for 4 hours next to the buddy in high heels. Looking back, for example, not only as an interpreter, but as a translator, trying to find my way, because I think we've all been there, where you know what you want, but you don't know how to get there. Being able to rely on others is so important. And that depends on the generosity of people. People who are very generous with their time, who get on online forums and answer your questions that are sometimes, newbie questions when you don't know what you're doing. But every question is worth asking. And I've always thought, because it happens to me today. I am very active, or recently not as active as I used to be, but on a community where we discuss how to use this CAT tool that we were talking about. And sometimes, Mireya, I see a question come in because I get email notifications and I know the answer and I really want to go and help the person asking, but I'm so busy that I just can't carve out 15 minutes to go in and write detailed instructions for what they need, or sometimes even 5 minutes. And so I've always been very grateful for people who are generous with their time. And I've always tried to give back as much as I can. And I think it's important to understand that no matter what stage you are in your career, there's someone behind you and there's someone who can learn from what you have to share. And maybe you've only been doing this for 1 year, but I'm sure you have something to share that will help someone who's just starting out. And the thing that I always tell students when I talk to them is, don't expect anyone to come and find you. Who's going to come and knock on your door and say, oh, I heard you were an interpreter. I would like you to interpret at this big conference. No one. You have to put yourself out there. And when you do that, do it in a very professional way and take it seriously. Take your work seriously, take your clients seriously, and do the very best you can. And when you stumble and fall, which you will, it will happen inevitably, it has happened to all of us. Dust yourself up, learn from what happened, and just keep going. And I think in both in teaching and in interpretation, particularly, no one wants to hire someone who doesn't, who looks like they don't know what they're doing, right? So make sure that you appear very confident, but that confidence has to be based on preparation and on, you have to be ready for what's coming. Never take it lightly. Whatever you're going to do, whether you're going to give a presentation, whether you're going to go interpret a small meeting between two people or a big 1,000, 5,000 person conference, never take it lightly. Take it seriously.